My mom made my kids sit at a tiny, rickety folding table in the corner at my dad's 65th birthday dinner, leaving their plates completely empty. They belong over there, and they can eat when the real guests are finished. My sister smirked, while my father quietly nodded along. I didn't yell or throw a scene. I simply picked up my children's coats, walked out, and launched a quiet investigation that completely dismantled their lives. What I uncovered 2 days later changed everything. My name is Mila Briggs. To understand how a cruel, subtle act of favoritism at a milestone family dinner in Charlotte, North Carolina, led to the immediate downfall of my family's prestigious law firm and exposed a decade-old corporate embezzlement scheme, you have to understand the toxic hierarchy that governed the Sterling family. For as long as I can remember, my mother, Evelyn Sterling, and my older sister, Chloe Sterling, treated me and my family as second-class citizens who existed merely to be tolerated. My father, Arthur Sterling, was a respected managing partner at Sterling and Associates, a prominent commercial litigation firm in downtown Charlotte. While Arthur presented an image of refined professionalism to the public, at home he was entirely spineless, bowing to every vindictive whim of my mother, Evelyn. Evelyn was an insufferably status-driven woman who judged human value based on trust funds, Ivy League diplomas, and social club memberships. Chloe was my mother's golden child. She had married Julian Vance, a wealthy real estate developer whose family held deep roots in North Carolina high society. Because Chloe's children attended elite private academies and her husband brought prestige to the family name, Evelyn showered them with lavish gifts, continuous praise, and boundless affection. I, on the other hand, had chosen a very different path. I worked as a senior compliance officer for the North Carolina Department of Revenue, enforcing tax laws and investigating financial irregularities. My husband, David Briggs, was a dedicated high school science teacher and youth athletics coach. We lived in a modest, comfortable home, drove practical vehicles, and focused on raising our two young children, Leo and Maya, with humility and strong moral principles. Because Dave and I did not measure our worth by country club memberships or designer labels, my mother and sister viewed us with quiet contempt. Evelyn frequently made passive-aggressive comments about David's salary, mocked my civil service career, and treated my children with cold indifference compared to Chloe's spoiled offspring. What my family never realized was that my position as a senior tax compliance officer gave me deep, specialized knowledge of corporate governance, audit procedures, and financial crime detection. I knew how money moved, where dishonest people hid assets, and how to spot systemic corruption. The boiling point occurred on a Saturday evening at the Grand Sovereign Manor, an upscale country club in South Park where my mother had organized a lavish 65th birthday dinner for my father. Over 40 guests had been invited, including high-profile judges, prominent corporate attorneys, and local political figures. When David, the kids, and I arrived at the grand dining room, I immediately noticed the elaborate table arrangements. In the center of the room stood a massive, beautifully decorated dining table draped in fine linen, set with sterling silver cutlery, imported crystal, and towering floral arrangements. Placed at the main table were name cards for my father, my mother, Chloe, her husband Julian, their two children, and several distinguished guests. However, when I looked around for our seats, I saw 4 wooden folding chairs set up around a small, wobbly card table pushed into a dark corner near the kitchen doors, far away from the main festivities. I walked over to my mother, keeping my voice calm despite the rising knot in my stomach. "Mom, where are David, the kids, and I supposed to sit? Is there a mistake with the place cards?" Evelyn didn't even look up from her champagne glass. She offered a cold, dismissive sneer. "There's no mistake, Mila. The main table is reserved for immediate family and our distinguished guests. You, David, and your children belong over there in the corner. We don't have space for everyone at the head table." Before I could reply, my sister Chloe leaned over with a smug, mocking smile. Besides, Mila, your kids are used to living simply. We don't want them spilling sauce on the imported tablecloths or ruining the formal photographs. I felt my blood boil, but I controlled my temper for the sake of my children. We walked over to the small corner table and sat down. 20 minutes later, waiters began serving exquisite multi-course meals to the guests at the main table. Plates of seared filet mignon, lobster tails, and truffle risotto were placed in front of Chloe's children, who immediately began complaining about the garnish. Meanwhile, our table was completely ignored. Waiters rushed past us carrying trays of food, but not a single plate was placed in front of my 7-year-old son Leo or my 5-year-old daughter Maya. Their plates remained completely empty. When I raised my hand to flag down a server, Chloe stood up from the main table, walked over, and leaned down with a malicious smirk. "Don't bother the waitstaff, Mila. Mom gave strict instructions. The kitchen prepared a fixed number of luxury meals for the real guests. Your kids can eat whatever bread rolls are left over when everyone else is done." I looked over at my father, Arthur. He met my eyes for a brief second, but instead of standing up for his own grandchildren, he quietly looked away and took a sip of his wine, agreeing with my mother's cruelty through his silence. Leo looked up at me, his wide brown eyes filled with confusion and hurt. "Mommy, did we do something bad? Why can't we have food like our cousins?" That question broke something inside me, replacing my hurt with a cold, absolute resolve. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a scene or make a dramatic announcement in front of the country club guests. I stood up, picked up my children's coats from the back of the folding chairs, and looked David directly in the eye. "We are leaving right now." As we walked toward the exit, my mother called out in a loud, sharp tone that carried across the room, "Mila, if you walk out of your father's milestone birthday dinner over a minor seating arrangement, don't bother coming back. You are being ungrateful and dramatic." I turned around at the double doors, looked Evelyn directly in the eye, and said in a calm, razor-sharp voice, "Enjoy your dinner, Mom, because starting Monday morning, every single thing this family built is coming down." We drove home in quiet dignity, stopped at a local diner to get hot meals for Leo and Maya, and put them to bed. The moment the kids were asleep, I walked into my home office, powered up my secure laptop, and began working. For years, I had ignored subtle red flags regarding my father's law firm and my brother-in-law's real estate business. I had chosen not to look into their affairs out of a desire to maintain family peace. But my family had crossed the line that night. They had humiliated my innocent children, and now they were going to face the full force of accountability. I knew that Sterling and Associates handled dozens of high-value estate settlements, corporate trust funds, and municipal development accounts. I also knew that over the past 3 years, my sister Chloe had suddenly acquired luxury sports cars, designer wardrobes, and an expensive beach house in Wilmington, despite her husband Julian's real estate firm suffering major public setbacks. On Monday morning, I utilized my professional access at the Department of Revenue to initiate a formal forensic inquiry into the corporate filings of Sterling and Associates and Julian's entity, Vance Coastal Developments, LLC. What I uncovered within 48 hours exceeded my worst expectations. My father, Arthur Sterling, and my brother-in-law, Julian Vance, were running a massive illegal financial scheme. For over 6 years, Arthur had been systematically siphoning money out of vulnerable client trust accounts and escrow funds managed by his law firm. To conceal the missing funds, he routed the stolen money through fake consulting contracts issued by Julian's real estate development company. Julian then washed the money through offshore holding accounts before kicking back tax-free cash payments directly to Arthur, Evelyn, and Chloe. In total, they had stolen over $4.2 million from widowed estate heirs, injured accident victims, and small municipal funds. Even worse, my mother, Evelyn, was actively participating in the fraud. She served as the designated treasurer for a local historic preservation charity, and corporate bank statements revealed she had transferred over $600,000 of charitable donations directly into her personal investment portfolio to fund her lavish lifestyle and country club dues. They were not refined high society aristocrats. They were common financial predators hiding behind expensive suits and arrogance. By Wednesday morning, I had compiled a bulletproof 300-page forensic audit report, complete with bank transaction logs, forged invoice copies, and wire transfer routing numbers. I personally delivered the file to the United States Attorney's Office for the Western District of North Carolina and the State Bar Association. On Friday afternoon, less than 6 days after the disastrous birthday dinner, the trap snapped shut. A joint task force consisting of federal agents, state tax investigators, and local police executed simultaneous search warrants at the offices of Sterling & Associates, Vance Coastal Developments, and my parents' residence. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, federal agents walked into the main lobby of Sterling & Associates with a federal arrest warrant. My father, Arthur Sterling, was escorted out of his corner office in handcuffs in front of his entire staff and legal associates. Simultaneously, state investigators raided Julian Vance's real estate firm, arresting him for felony money laundering and tax fraud. At my parents' house, officers served emergency asset freezing order and search warrant. Federal agents seized my mother's luxury vehicles, impounded her designer jewelry collections, and froze every personal and corporate bank account associated with the family name. That evening, my sister Chloe called my phone frantically, her voice trembling with hysterical tears. "Mila, you have to help us. Federal agents arrested Dad and Julian. They froze all our accounts and locked the house. Mom is having a complete nervous breakdown. You work for the government. You have to fix this." I listened to her panic with complete, unshakable calm. "I didn't cause this, Chloe," I replied smoothly. "Dad and Julian stole millions from innocent people, and Mom laundered charitable donations. You enjoyed the stolen wealth while treating my children like trash." "Mila, please," Chloe sobbed. "We're family. You can't let them do this to us. What are people going to say?" "You told me on Saturday that my kids belonged in the corner with empty plates because they weren't real guests. Now you and Mom can figure out where you belong when the federal court finishes with you." I hung up the phone and blocked her number. The legal fallout was swift, devastating, and absolute. Faced with overwhelming paper trails and undeniable digital bank records, my father, Arthur Sterling, entered a guilty plea to federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. He was sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary and ordered to pay full restitution, completely destroying his legal career and personal reputation. Julian Vance was convicted of felony money laundering and commercial fraud, receiving a 7-year prison sentence. My mother, Evelyn Sterling, was indicted for grand larceny and charitable fraud. To avoid state prison time, she agreed to a plea deal that required her to surrender her remaining personal assets, her historic home, and her country club memberships. She was forced to move into a tiny, subsidized 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, completely ostracized by the high society socialites she had spent her entire life trying to impress. Sterling & Associates collapsed into immediate bankruptcy, its license revoked by the state bar, while Vance Coastal Developments was dissolved by court order to satisfy creditor claims. Chloe was forced to sell her luxury possessions to pay for her husband's legal fees, taking a job as an entry-level retail clerk to support her children while facing total social isolation. With the toxic presence of my biological family permanently removed from our lives, my home filled with an overwhelming sense of peace and security. Using a small, legitimate inheritance left strictly to me by my late maternal grandmother years prior, David and I established the Briggs Youth Literacy Fund, a local nonprofit foundation that provides free books, nutrition programs, and educational resources to underprivileged elementary students across North Carolina. 2 years later, our lives are filled with genuine joy, deep purpose, and quiet contentment. On a warm summer evening, sitting on our back porch watching Leo and Maya laugh while playing soccer in the yard with David, I feel an absolute sense of fulfillment. I taught my children that real strength does not come from stepping on others or displaying wealth. It comes from standing up against injustice, protecting those you love, and living a life rooted in truth. Educational lesson. This story highlights critical legal mechanics surrounding corporate trust funds, forensic tax audits, and the legal liabilities of financial fraud. Fiduciary duty and trust violations. Attorneys and corporate officers hold a strict fiduciary duty to manage client trust accounts and escrow funds with absolute integrity. Siphoning or commingling funds from estate accounts constitutes severe felony embezzlement, leading to mandatory disbarment and federal incarceration. Money laundering and shell entities. Routing stolen or embezzled funds through secondary businesses using fake consulting invoices constitutes federal money laundering. Under federal law, individuals who knowingly facilitate or benefit from laundered assets face joint criminal liability. Whistleblower integrity and government audits. Forensic financial audits rely on matching bank transaction logs, tax filings, and wire transfers. When systemic fraud is exposed through official regulatory channels, federal asset forfeiture laws allow law enforcement to freeze and seize ill-gotten gains immediately to protect victims.